Hello and welcome to the Dublin Conversations. Paul, would you like to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. So I'm Paul Spiers. I'm founder of the New P&L Institute, which is a culture and leadership consultancy, host of the New P&L Principles and Leadership and Business podcast, and founder of the soon-to-be, in September we're launching, the New P&L Global Leadership Network, which is a global community of leaders, influencers, disruptors, and pioneers of purpose.
Can you elaborate a bit more what was meant by EPNL for the unfamiliar with the term?
Absolutely. So the new P&L is a concept we've developed, and that is business based on a new kind of P&L principles and leadership, not just profit and loss. So it's our belief that if you have the foundations of a new P&L in your business, that your values and your purpose and your principles are in line, and that your leadership understands those values and has an empathy and a consciousness, a self-awareness about it, then you should be in profit and not loss in many ways. So that new P&L should fundamentally impact in a positive way the old P&L.
So really what you're putting forward is almost like a new framework of thinking, which very much echoes what the Dublin
Absolutely.
Conversations quest is in the field of communications practice. So if I maybe get the conversation underway, in that we use the analogy that many people work in our industry, whether it's public relations, communications, advertising, and so on, in some ways can be a bit like the early astronomers who have an understanding of the world and their place in the universe, but with themselves at the center of it. And we believe in the Dublin Conversations that we need bigger thinking. And one of the most critical tasks is really to unlearn these existing ideas of advertising, communication, public relations, in order to be able to step outside them to see a bigger picture from which then new thinking will emerge, new ideas and better ways of doing as a result. So we begin our journey with the concept of what we call the 5 steps to the Dublin window. And this is 5 steps really to help get people out of the existing cages of thinking that bind them. And step one is that, unlike the Earth being at the center of the universe, we believe that actually the critical foundation stone for anyone working in the communications industry, whether it's advertising, communication, public relations, and so on, is the idea that really it's a bigger picture of social interactions, of how we socially interact. And in order to effectively socially interact with others, you need to have confidence. And confidence, not in its usual sense of self-belief, but rather in the phrase of a reliable expectation of subsequent reality. So we've got an anticipation exists on a number of levels. You have a confidence in your own perception of what you understand to be reality. You have a confidence in your own purpose. You have confidence in others, and others have confidence in you. Or there's confidence others have in each other. And lastly, maybe a zeitgeist confidence, a confidence of both, say, business, politics, and so on. And really, that to earn confidence, one of the most powerful strategies is to have a coherent and compelling purpose. And so, therefore, in our framework of thinking, at the heart of social interactions is how do you earn confidence in others through your sense of purpose of who you are and what you are, and your purposefulness of how you help others. So, just obviously, clearly an area of keen interest to yourself, Paul. Any thoughts about this as a step one?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting step one. I think if I was thinking about this, obviously, in the lead up to our conversation, and I thought around confidence and purpose, where does that confidence comes from? It comes from a greater understanding of the world. Where does that understanding comes from? It comes from knowledge. And where does that knowledge come from? It comes from curiosity. And you know that I speak a bit on curiosity in some of the conversations and keynotes I deliver. And I think that's really something that needs to underpin both purpose and confidence, is that conscious curiosity that we all need to drive a little bit more effectively in ourselves. Because in order to understand that purpose, what that purpose is for a business or for ourselves, we need to be curious about the world around us. We need to be curious about our interaction with the world. And then we need to be curious to develop our knowledge, which will develop our confidence. So I think a lot of that confidence and purpose, the foundations for that is a far greater sense of curiosity and a far more intentional sense of curiosity within ourselves.
So why is it some people are curious and others not? What do you think the reasons for that?
I think we're all curious. I just think some of us are moving further and further away from it. And again, as we've discussed in the past, algorithms play a big role in pacifying our natural sense of curiosity. We sit at our screens sort of staring and not caring, or swiping and wiping and so on. And all of those things are, because of the way algorithms work, all of those things are narrowing our natural sense of curiosity and intrigue and inquiry. So I think we're all born with it. We all have it as children. We all ask those questions, and anyone who's had children knows the wonderful and the weird and the wonderful questions that children ask. That's all a natural sense of curiosity. But as we grow, I think partly the education system sort of bangs it out of us a little bit because we have rote learning. But certainly in the modern world, algorithms are really narrowing our natural sense of curiosity. We have to be very, very conscious of how we combat that, if you like, and the way we go about our daily activities.
And so advents like Chat GPT and AI could be portents for even greater diminishing of curiosity. Is there a risk of that?
I think there is a risk, but again, I'm not a Luddite. I love technology, but it's how you use it as opposed to how it uses you. So, it's the old cliche of rubbish in, rubbish out. The greater your sense of using technology to investigate and to be curious and understand if something pops up, making a note of it, going back and researching, learning more, understanding how you join the dots, and using technology to facilitate all of that. That's a wonderful experience of technology. If you allow it to just passively deliver to you, then it's a very negative experience of technology. So these new developments, Chat GTP and everything else, if you utilize them to your advantage and be very conscious about how you harness them and use them to investigate and to expand curiosity, wonderful. If you don't, then it's a very negative experience, I think.
Certainly one of the key foundation stones to the philosophy of the Dublin Conversations is a respect for what's known as humble intelligence, respect and reverence for humility. And I suspect that's probably an important ingredient in fueling the curious mind. Are there any other sort of dimensions that one can, as I say, stretch, grow, invest in one's curiosity?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really nice statement. Actually, there's a great author you probably know, American author Charles Bukowski, and
Yeah.
I'm paraphrasing this quote, but it's something I use all the time. He said the problem with the world is all of the intelligent people have all of the self-doubt, and all the stupid people have all the confidence. And I think that's a wonderful kind of example of curiosity as well. Sometimes we can be generalists and have a little bit of knowledge and be able to deliver it, or deliver the veneer of knowledge in a conversation, but to actually focus on concentrating and digging down on that curiosity is far more important. And I think that, there are literal and figurative ways you can do it. An example is looking up and looking out on the world, looking at the world in front of you rather than always figuratively and literally staring at that screen when you're walking down the road, when you're looking at things. I give the example in one of my keynotes of, if you're walking around your city or your town, look up at the second floor. There's a whole new city on the second floor up, particularly in older places like London, where you can make huge discoveries and huge expanses of curiosity and inquiry just by looking up at that single floor. So the figurative and literal looking out upon the world is the easiest and the most important way to expand your curiosity, but then using technology to capture those things that intrigue you, to take a photograph, to do an audio recording, to text something, to take a video. We've got the best thing we've ever had in the history of humankind to capture our curiosity, but we use it to diminish it instead often.
Which brings us nicely on to our step 2, which is that in order to socially interact, the mechanics really of it are you listen, connect, do. And that's listen in its widest sense of the word, as well as like connecting with the world, like you're suggesting there, in looking up, capturing and a doing, taking a photograph, and doing can be a development of an idea as well as a tangible outcome. But it's a constant, continuous loop, pumped at the heart of it with the idea that the stronger sense of purpose you have, the more the flow of listen, connect, do to engage. And the Dublin Conversation is very driven by the idea of what's called emergence theory, that our world around us is not necessarily shaped by design, but what emerges from that. And that sociologists can now do experiments on human behavior where they've established almost like a universal human law that 2 out of 3 people will help a stranger. which also means that 1 out of 3 don't. And that's not to make any moral judgment, but really to identify 2 prime instincts that drive the broad range of people in their social interactions. One we've coined we-led, where your instinct is to think of the group, the collective, the communal interest first, and me-led, which is to think of your own self-interest. And obviously this can be very driven by context, but nonetheless potentially offers a way forward for ideas like public relations, where it could identify itself as a philosophy that's in integrated communications, it's we-led, whereas maybe advertising in integrated communications is a we-led philosophy. And we've also seen the emergence of this term comms, which doesn't have any universe accepted formal definition. And so we're in a world where the Dublin conversation believes we need to create a bigger, look for a bigger window, and that we need a new label that goes beyond like the existing terms of advertising, communications, and public relations, and so on. So a lot there, but just so any thoughts there about listening, connect, doing, we led, me led, and comms. Then any thoughts there, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big, naturally, as you would expect, I'm a big thinker on the power of words, and I think when we shortened communications to comms, we've almost shortened the definition or diminished the definition of what communications is, and far too often we're listening not really with our full selves. We're waiting to speak rather than genuinely listening. I think shortening communications to comms, we've almost lost the essence of what we're supposed to be doing, which is communicating that dialogue rather than a monologue. Comms has become a technical industry term rather than an expression, communications, of what we should be doing. And I think we've lost a little bit of the essence and the emphasis in that. I think that connection again comes back down to listening with intent, not wanting to speak or waiting to speak, to asking people questions, to having that natural sense of inquiry, and then acting on it. And I don't think there's a we-led or a me-led necessarily. It's a blend of both of those things. Sometimes we need to be we-led, and sometimes we need to be me-led, because ultimately that me-led in that moment, building a business, for example, will enable us to be we-led. It's what the end result or that end motivation for that moment of me-led thinking is. So I don't think it's an either or. I think there's a blend of those two things. But to go back to my first point, I think the redefining of communications into comms, I think sometimes removes the obvious essence of what we're supposed to be doing, communicating, not just tactically delivering something to an audience, but having a dialogue with them.
Sorry, it might sound like a dumb question, but why is it important, this essence of communications? I mean, why is that?
Because it's not pushed out. Communicating is a conversation, I think, a two-way conversation. Comms has started to become, in our industry, or in the communications industry, started to become the pushing out, the dissemination of information, rather than the conversation that needs to exist, the communication that needs to exist around that information. So I think shortening it, I mean, and this is only my theory. I might be completely off the route here. But I think when we look at something, we just think about it as comms as opposed to communication. We're redefining what it is. And I think comms has become the delivery of that information rather than the conversation that needs to exist around that information.
And the emphasis there on conversations seemingly is perhaps structured by this model of listen, connect, doing.
Exactly.
Then the third goal, that of having like listen, connect, do. This is influenced by the work of behavioral psychologists like Professor Daniel Kahneman, who identifies that humans are emotionally driven beings. But if you identify sort of 5 key heuristics or rules of thumb, this could be the route to effective social interactions. And those 5 heuristics are being known, which really tallies with an industry practice of creating awareness, but also being liked, and not necessarily an effective liking. That can also be respect, admiration, and also a paradoxical liking. So we might actively like to dislike someone. So there's a lot of people who react negatively to people like, say, Piers Morgan, the media figure. And then you've also got trusted. And even though you may be well known, because we're essentially lazy in our thinking, we need to be front of mind when people are making key decisions. And lastly, when you're in doubt or when you need affirmation of any social proof that something's being talked about. And Dublin Conversation believes that these five dimensions actually frame any core social interaction from your uh, being to the next campaign. So I just wonder any thoughts there about this, about these sort of five dimensions. Is anything missing there, or any emphasis within those five, or is there something different we need to add there? Any thoughts there, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is very interesting because I read something a while back on social media, and it was a quote that said the whole of social media can be summed up with three words: please validate me. And I thought that was a really, really succinct definition. And maybe we are leaning at the moment too much towards the being liked and not enough towards the to being a trusted authority. You know, we talk about telling, storytelling and knowledge acquisition and all these sorts of things, but trust is it's an important virtue in business that is really underrated, I think. And when we talk about trust, we talk about it in generic terms. Leaders need to be trusted, employees need to be trusted. But I wonder if we're trying to define what trust is in business, then we need to think about what the absence of trust might look like. So if someone's not trusted in a business, what are the actions that are taken within that business that diminish trust, that reduce trust? And if we can identify those things within a business that reduce trust, like monitoring on a screen if we're hybrid working, like not empowering employees, whatever it happens to be, if we can eradicate or move towards eradicating those things that diminish trust within that business, then we start to build more trust by virtue of removing those things. And I think rather than being liked, from my own personal view, I think being trusted and being known and recognized as having that knowledge and working towards something more purposeful is far more critical than being liked, I think.
And are those ingredients for this, going back to the word confidence, that, as I say, to earn that confidence, trust, and there's maybe an interesting discussion here about whether, so trust an asset, but then is confidence an agency that emerges from trust? So trust by itself doesn't change things, but it's the dynamic of confidence that reverberates, connects, and causes a chain reaction. I don't know any thoughts there.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the earlier point that perhaps too many of us are trying to gather our confidence on the basis of being liked as opposed to being trusted. And I think the more, it's probably easier in some regards to, to be trusted and build confidence as a result of being trusted takes a lot more personal effort, because it takes, again, back to inquiry, to study, to knowledge, to do all those other things, to demonstrate empathy, to want to understand people, to demonstrate the trust, to earn that trust in what you think and feel and do every day in your interactions with people. To gain confidence from being liked is probably quicker, but ultimately it is far more vacuous over time and far less likely to have that longevity, because it's based on nothing. So I think if we can earn that confidence through trust, then the strength of longevity that goes with that confidence will be far more powerful, because it's built on more solid foundations, I think.
Now it's just a step forward, which is also an illustration there, that having realized you may need to get known, like, trusted, front of mind being talked about, how do you go about that? And we've identified what we call 5 opens choices, with opens being an acronym for own, paid for, earned, nudge, and shared. And it's different from, say, like the established what's called the PESO model in the communications industry, in that the O is not about own channels, but about your own being, reputation. So you mentioned the qualities there of earning trust, such as empathy, so your own empathetic abilities and so on. And we introduced a dimension of nudge, where you can, influence behaviors without communicating with someone, by changing the range of choices and so on available to them. I just wonder, any thoughts about this? Does this sort of scope the range of interactions, and is it a helpful model in helping us manage how we can build a more empathetic, purposeful, trusted world?
I think it is, but what sits under this again is intention, I think, because people are very, very, very good today, I think, at understanding what the deeper or the real intention is behind someone trying to nudge or to share or tell that story or empathize with them or whatever it happens to be. So it all depends where your intention is coming from and what your motivation is to engage with that person or that group of people socially at that time. So I think all of these 5 choices, the opens are correct, but it's demonstrating an authentic intention underneath it to demonstrate that you are genuinely trying to earn their respect, their engagement, their conversation, their communication, their trust. And it's coming from the right place, not from a place of, I want to do that so you can purchase, buy, do, feel, whatever it happens to be. So intention and the authenticity of that tension is critical in this area, I think.
And I love that. I do indeed like this concept of authentic intention, which could that maybe be a facet or some quality that resides in our step one of this idea of purpose and who you are, what you are, and your role in the world. I was just wondering if that's something where uh, having identified your purpose, which will then contain your authentic intentions, enables you to be what sort of turbocharges in some ways your pathway through these sort of steps 2 and 3 and 4 there.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that, because if you go back to purpose, and I think a lot of businesses confuse what purpose is. It's always, not always, but it's often seemingly aligned with SDGs or environmental goals, whatever it happens to be. But a lot of those things often feel like you're trying to retrofit them into a business, and there's a lack of genuine intention in your desire to deliver them. So go back to what your real purpose is in your business. You might want to be, you might want to be the best widget manufacturer in the northeast of England. And if that's your purpose, then there's nothing wrong with that. Because if you want to be the best widget manufacturer in the northeast of England, then you have to look across all of the areas of that business that will drive that purpose. How will you be the best operationally? How will you be the best environmentally? How will you be the best in the way you deal with your employees? How will you be the best in terms of the way you communicate with your community? So if, don't get stuck on one thing and trying to create a veneer around the environmental concerns or whatever it happens to be, because people will see through the transparency of that commitment, because there's no deep intention behind it. Go back to your purpose, trying to understand what you are, what you're here for, what you're trying to create at the essence of the heart of your business, and then commit intentionally to those things, and then understand how purpose and environment and all these other things fit into that deep intention and heart of your business.
So correct me here then, that is there a situation then where many people then are maybe guilty of seeing things like ESG and purpose, seeing it as a sort of tactical extension of what they're doing, rather than
Exactly.
going back to the fundamental goals of their existence? Is that sort of
Absolutely. It becomes whether they have a boardroom or not, it becomes a boardroom agenda item rather than thinking at the heart of your culture. And if it's the former, if it's a boardroom agenda item, then it becomes a problem to solve rather than a solution to the problems you have. If it's embedded in your thinking and your culture and your way you do business, it becomes a solution. If it's a boardroom agenda, it is a problem to be solved. And that even that basic element will flavor and color the way you approach that challenge or that opportunity. The way you will see it, the way you will do it, your commitment to it over time, whether it's a problem or a solution to the problems you have.
Which then really leads us to step 5, and that we've posited the idea of something called like regenerative comms. So that most communications analysis and models looks at a sender and receiver, and not beyond about the wider implications they have on their ecosystem, the social fabric of trust, togetherness, and being able to come together. And the idea that through any social interaction, you seek to replenish and grow. So the opposite of that would be, say, like a politician who willfully lies. They may gain some tactical short-term gain, but then there's a cost of diminishing the wider sense people have in their communal sense of trust and togetherness. So I just want any sort of thoughts about this idea about the idea of regenerativeness in our interactions.
Yeah, I think post-COVID, there is a huge challenge for the communications community, because I think when we went into COVID and all of those values that many companies espoused and argued that they held and that they demonstrated, we really saw in the first 6, 9 months of COVID, those businesses that really sat in their values and that have values at the heart of their culture, and those that may have espoused them but never really delivered on them, because we saw when push comes to shove, that some CEOs and some businesses actually well, it's actually what I call vinyl values, that their commitment to those values were about as thin as the paper that they're printed on and sitting behind the reception walls. So I think in a post-COVID world where we were really exposed to how thin the commitment to some values were, the comms industry really has to think a lot harder about how it articulates those values in a social setting, how we really genuinely demonstrate the social value and the interaction and the impact that business wants to make, because people are very, very skeptical and very, very critical of businesses that don't genuinely live by their values now.
Well, I'm a great believer that a value is not a value until you do it when it hurts. So,
Exactly.
and I think really, as you say, the COVID was a remarkable shakeout of a reality check.
Yeah.
For many businesses. So would you then sort of say there's value in this idea of thinking of like regenerativeness, that living by authentic values, and that one needs to look beyond just the immediate sort of interaction and the repercussions on the wider environment now?
Absolutely. And again, it comes right back to step one, to that purpose. I often talk about with your purpose, it gives leaders courage. To communicate, to be able to deliver to their audiences, because you turn back to that purpose and you know that what you're about to communicate, what you're going to do, the products you're developing, the innovations you're working on are rooted in that purpose, because that purpose is clear. And when you have times of crisis like COVID and many other things that we're experiencing at the moment, you turn back to that purpose to anchor that business and to rethink and refocus and reassess where that business is and where it's going. And you use that purpose to recalibrate, if you like. So if you don't have that purpose at the heart of your business, you've got nothing to turn back to in good times and bad, to understand how to move that business forward, how to communicate with those audiences, and how to do both of those things with authenticity.
Well, it brings us then to sort of the last about having completed our journey, and really sort of a question that you're clearly on a mission to think differently, challenge conventions, and so on. Having done these 5 steps, does something like Dublin Conversations help people like you in your quest in terms of its efforts to create a bigger window, or is it irrelevant or marginal or of little value? And how do you feel now, having done these 5 steps, about the question, what does better look like?
I think it's great, and I think it's always important for us to have these conversations, to think a little bit differently, to challenge ourselves. Just because I have my views on the way the world should be and a new P&L and all those other things doesn't mean I'm right. It's only the best collection of ideas and thinking that I have at this given point in time, based on my research, my knowledge, and my curiosity. So having these conversations helps to test my theory. I hope that it maybe contributes to the Dublin Conversations as well. But I think it's been a great conversation to have, to expand my thinking around what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, and my own purpose.
Thank you. Indeed, as I say, it's been fascinating and enlarging in terms of perspectives and ideas, and even some great phrases there. I do love vinyl values and other ideas going forward. So, having experienced the Dublin Conversations, 5 steps to the Dublin window, is there anything we should be doing different from what you've observed?
I think it just comes back, and it would for me, but it comes back to that curiosity and that conscious intention, which starts at phase 1, but it feeds, for me, through all of them. Always taking that step back in that moment and asking yourself with a good healthy dose of self-awareness, why am I taking this action? Why am I trying to deliver this tactic or this strategy? How does it align with my purpose? What else do I need to be, from a curiosity perspective, what else do I need to be considering? As you alluded to, what is the context around it? What are the foreseen and unforeseen circumstances, and the known, the old Rumsfeld thing, the unknown unknowns and the known unknowns and all the rest of it. So just being a bit more acutely aware, consciously, and from a curiosity perspective, of how each of these 5 steps impact on me, my purpose, and my business.
I do love that idea of the self-awareness, and that, as I say, far too many people in this day and age of everything's in a rush, not enough time, and there's perhaps a lack or need for more greater self-awareness, as you say. Then, is there any sort of specific action steps do you think the Dublin Conversations needs to take?
I think everyone needs to come back to being, again, conscious in that moment of their curiosity. So whether it is the Dublin Conversations, whether it is something we are doing every day, capturing and curating the questions we are asking ourselves in that moment, the things that we are thinking about, the things we see, the dots we need to be joining, all those other, I mean, they sound like cliches, but they're not. It's being much more conscious of our curiosity and the things that we are thinking about every day, and capturing them somehow, whatever works for you, curating them and revisiting them, because we lose so many things every day that we think about in a given moment. We don't write it down, we don't capture it, we don't video it, we don't text it or capture the image or whatever. And those things hold the genesis of wonderful ideas for the Dublin Conversations, for our other conversations, for our campaigns and our businesses. But we let thousands probably of ideas, certainly hundreds of great ideas, go every day, every week, just because we don't stop and capture it in that moment.
And I suppose that why we don't do that is, again, maybe down to curiosity is not respected enough, not rated enough, not given sufficient priority, and seem to get in the way rather than actually a profound response to a more profound form of living, I suspect.
Yeah, and I think it's also, reframing the way we think about the interruptions that we make to capture that thing in that moment. So I don't get it all right all the time by any shake of the imagination, but I made a commitment to myself when I started the new P&L that I would try and capture every idea that I could when I have it. And it's taken me a long, long time. I still swear at myself and I think, I've got to stop and write that down or capture that or do whatever. But I might interrupt what I'm doing at the given point in time, but those ideas, several times for me, and what I've done with the new P&L, have been the genesis of wonderful ideas that have taken the business on a new direction, on a different direction, on a more successful commercial direction. If I hadn't captured it then I'd still be dragging my heels on my toes doing something else and taking a lot longer. So it's reframing, whether that's an interruption or whether it's a moment of inspiration, I think.
I always say those ideas out of the blue is your unconscious telling you something's important.
Totally.
And a massive thanks, Paul, to a very important conversation we've had, a delightful
Pleasure.
conversation, and I say certainly one that helps the Dublin Conversations grow in its mission.